Bladeborn's alive!
Hello, I'm David, this is Hobby Jackal, and I'm going to be having a look at the latest edition of White Dwarf 482, and digging around in this magazine to have a look at all the good stuff for Warcry and Warhammer Underworlds, of which there's an absolute shed load. Let's check it out. And a brief apology to my regular viewers, the video's been slightly delayed recently because our household has been hit thrice-fold by gifts from Nurgle, the utter bastard. Right, on with the magazine. So as you can see, the November 2022 issue is a chocker edition for added extras. I will just touch on these briefly, but as mentioned, the focus of this video is very much Warcry and Warhammer Underworlds. So if you're into PC gaming, you're getting 12 free games in this edition, so there's Warhammer Quest included in there, which is an excellent take on the old game. Talisman, loved that board game back in the day. Shadow the Horned Rat, which I played back on PS1, I think. And the brilliant Mordheim City the Damned, which is a classic recreation of the classic game everybody still talks about. So pulling out these other bits and pieces, there's content for the Horus Heresy, Necromunda, and Kill Team. And we're on to the stuff we're here for. So you are getting Bladeborn cards. These are slightly thinner than the cards you'll get in the regular box games, but they're still decent quality. And you're getting this template for making your own Warcry Dashboard. Now let's have a look at the articles and then we'll check these out in a bit more detail. So issue 482. So for Warcry in this edition, you're getting a battle report on Mark Bedford's absolutely fantastic board, which we saw in the last issue of White Dwarf. You're getting the Warcry Dashboard, which we've seen the template for already, and it's actually a hobby article showing you how to turn that into something a little bit more substantial. And then the third article, the Bladeborn Return. Now this is something Warcry players have been shouting out for since the new edition arrived. Bladeborn were introduced in the Tome of Champions 2021, which sadly due to release issues wasn't released until 2022, so a lot of people haven't had that much chance to enjoy the Bladeborn fighters. Now this issue doesn't re-release all of them, it just includes the couple of warbands that were included in Warhammer Underworlds Gnarlwood. But it's great to see that the term Bladeborn is still being used, and it gives us the full rules for using them in the second edition. Finally, before I dig into the magazine, for Warhammer Underworlds, we're getting another Glory Points article, and this time it's focusing on the Nemesis format. So diving in slightly out of order, I'm going to go straight for the Bladeborn, as I know this is something the community have been shouting out for. So a couple of things on these pages to touch upon. It does mention the Bladeborn fighters from issue 477, so that was the Cunning Crew, Xandai's Truthseekers, Black Powder's Buccaneers and the Exiled Dead, before going on to say a couple more have been released for the game. Now there's nothing in here, unfortunately, to say that those cards are usable or official in the second edition of Warcry. But again, it very much depends on your gaming group whether you want to use those. Second key thing on this page is the using Bladeborn rules. Now those that picked up the Tome of Champions 2021 will be very familiar with these rules because they have barely changed at all. So here we go. In fact, aside from some slight changes to the wording here and there to account for the new warbands they're referencing, and the fact that a couple of narrative things have changed in the second edition, these rules stay exactly the same. For those of you that didn't pick up the Tome of Champions 2021 or haven't actually read these rules in a previous White Dwarf, Warhammer Underworlds warbands are referred to as Bladeborn. This is just the catch-all term for those particular warbands and fighters. They can be allied into a Warcry warband. Now if you're playing in matched play or open play, that's really easy. You just kind of chuck them in whilst following your rules for how many leaders you can have and that kind of thing. In narrative, it gets a little bit more involved and characterful, as suits the narrative format of playing, whereby you follow the usual rules for allying in a fighter with the hero rune mark, unless of course they are your leader, at which point you unlock the rest of the fighters from that Bladeborn warband as potential allies. Final thing to note is that each of the cards will have a faction rune mark saying which of the wider warbands they actually slot directly into. And not only do they receive their own abilities linked to the rune marks on their cards, but they can actually use any of the rune mark abilities linked to that faction, providing you with some really interesting options when you're building your warband. So let's take a look at the cards. So these have been published both in the book and on the cards that you're actually getting alongside this set. So at the bottom, ignore these, couple of Kill Team cards. So you're getting the handy little cards with the abilities, as well as some nice second edition Warcry art cards. Worth noting that the backs of these do actually have the alternate warbands, so it's only the Sons of Velmorn ability card that does have the nice backed card. But generally speaking, when you're playing the game, they're going to be backs down, so no harm, no foul. The other thing that's nice for fans of Warhammer Underworlds is that they generally make about half the Warcry warband, so a lot of the Underworlds warbands kind of come in around the 500 mark. So generally speaking, moving a few fighters around here or there, you can actually do a match play or open warband by just combining two Underworlds warbands, providing they're of the same type. So if you're looking at the Gnarlspirit Pact, they're a Slaves to Darkness warband as indicated by this faction rune mark, and they alone come in at 560 points. Now, Toma Champions 2021, not 100% official right now because second edition's come out and it's tweaked points all over the place. However, this did come at the very tail end of the first edition, so it may be that these can be considered to be slightly more balanced perhaps than some of the things that came before. Now, if you're playing amongst friends, why not just use these stats? And the reason I'm actually cracking these open now is that if you look at the stats across everything, there are tweaks here or there, but if you're looking at a small warband of fighters, say half a warband, the points probably aren't going to change too much. So just to give you an idea of what you could make, assuming these are going to be re-released for second edition, or if you're just going to use this old book and play with friends that are just like, that's fine, they're pretty balanced, then here's what you can make just by chucking the Gnarlspirit Pact with another warband. So for Slaves to Darkness, you have Kagra's Ravagers and the Godsworn Hunt. Kagra's Ravagers come in themselves at 625 points. And combining this with the 560 point Gnarlspirit Pact, you can make a 1000 point match play or open play warband just by taking out one of the two leaders. Similarly, the Godsworn Hunt come in at 650 points when you include every single fighter. Again, you could take out either one of the two leaders and that would give you the right number of points. Or you could just take out these two chunky lads who are in at 105 points each. Bob's your uncle, you got a Warcry warband. Sons of Velmorn fall into the Soul Blight Gravelords. Now they themselves come in at 505 points for all 5 fighters, allowing you to combine them with the Crimson Court that are a fantastic set of models, coming themselves to 590 points, and you can make these fit together just by taking out one of the vampires should you wish to, so Ennius Curseborn or Velas von Fane. And the Sepulchral Guard, an original from the first wave of Shadespire models for Warhammer Underworlds when it first launched. So the Sepulchral Guard come in at a neat 450 points, meaning that you can combine all of these together with the Sons of Velmorn and you will have a 955 point warband. So there you have it, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but that's sort of what I'll be thinking of if I picked these up and I already had some Underworlds warbands to hand. So journeying backwards through the Warcry articles, we hit the Warcry Dashboard. Now you've been given a card template to cut out as you see fit. Now, a number of businesses do actually create quite neat Warcry dashboards if this is your thing, and there's also loads of versions of people creating these online themselves. However, for somebody like me who's perhaps not that skilled or not that fast about buying a dashboard, this is quite neat, and you can just cut these out and use them as is, should you wish to. Just a place to plonk your dice, tote up scores as you go along, and record which round it is. Now, the article itself actually does show you how to make something a little bit more substantial. And the nice thing about this is that it gives me the feels of the old White Dwarf issues where they were pulling out foam board and model trees from railway modelling shops and showing you how to create your own stuff. Now you're getting a materials needed section, so suggesting using foam board, XPVC or XPS board, spray adhesive, glue sticks, pins, modelling knives and all sorts. However, the guidance here is actually really nice step by step, including some nice tips for using a modelling knife on a foam board by using a pin to punch out the corners to stop it getting all raggedy when you're cutting in there with your knife. Following these simple steps, you'll end up with a board that will sit really nicely with the dice as you play your game. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm going to be looking into doing. So final Warcry article in my backwards journey through this White Dwarf issue. We get to see the absolutely stunning terrain created by Mark Bedford for Warcry in much more detail as we watch his warband, the Rotmire Creed, face off against Damien Pedley's Horns of Hashut. Now, Mark Bedford is a staple of the Games Workshop team, currently working as the content lead for the Specialist Design Studio, but he was a designer way back and then went over to Forge World and all sorts, so he's been around for quite some time. And Damien Pedley is also likely to be a name you'll recognise, and he's currently a member of the Heavy Metal team, who cover the Specialist Design Studio work. Now, I'm not going to go any further than this, the first page of the battle, just to show you the kind of format that you can expect to see. And in good narrative fashion, every single one of their fighters has an appropriate name. Sorry about the background noise, the heavens have kind of opened here. So an unexpected crossing of paths. And the battle report is split into text here, which is showing a narrative version of what's happening on the board. And down here you'll also get the step-by-step of what's happening during the battle. So Battle Round 1, we're getting the dashboard used down here, which is pretty cool. And it does show the 2 different designs of dashboard you can use if you choose to make this. The narrative continues for every single round of the game, and as said, you do get a full breakdown here. But yep, that's pretty much where I'm going to end for this one, because I don't want to spoil the battle report for those that might want to read this. If you do have any questions related to this or any of the other content that I've kind of whizzed through, do let me know. So finally, I'm going to take us to the Warhammer Underworlds article. Now, Glory Points is an ongoing series of articles, and it's often headlined by Dave Sanders, who's the senior games developer for what's now being called the Warhammer Age of Sigmar skirmish team, which, as we found out in previous editions, does now involve covering some of the Warcry side of things as well. So this entire article is about a brand new format of Warhammer Underworlds Nemesis, which is, from most of the accounts I've seen, taking gaming clubs by storm. Now, Warhammer Underworlds Harrowdeep introduced Rivals format, which was very much playing with a pre-made deck for your warband, which you get in the set when you buy the models. Now, Nemesis gives players the best of both, so there were previously players that invested heavily in the deck building element of this game. Now, this is a popular tactical challenge with websites dedicated to building your decks, but the problem with this format was that it would create a really high price point and strategic knowledge to sort of let people enter the game. Now, Nemesis comes in and kind of fixes this issue by saying, right, you've got your Rivals deck, this is a deck that your warband comes with, and alongside this we've released a set of universal Rivals decks which can be mixed in with these. So choosing one of those universal rival decks, mashing it in with your warband's cards, creates what's now known as a Nemesis deck, giving you the tactical options of which deck you decide and also which cards you decide to draw into your brand new deck. So going into a little bit more detail, you're going to choose 12 or more objective cards from your warband's rival deck and the universal Rivals deck you picked. And no more than 6 of those cards can be surge objectives. Now, for those that are unfamiliar, they're objectives that you score instantly. This is your objective deck. Now you choose 20 or more power cards from your warband's Rivals deck and the universal Rivals deck you picked. No more than half of these cards can be gambits. This is your power deck. And that's it. You're not limited to how many you have from one deck or the other, and you can get pretty creative. So this article goes on to give some examples of what you might want to do. It touches on, for experienced players, the deck building challenge Nemesis poses is different to that of Championship. You're not trying to create an optimized deck using every card in rotation. Instead, you're trying to identify which of your warbands and which of your Rivals decks offer you the greatest potential. The other nice thing about this is that there's less need to chase the meta and your warband will always be usable. Now, there are discussions online about some of the earliest perhaps being a little bit iffier because, you know, they don't have their own full deck to use. But there certainly are some people doing some interesting things with those earliest of warbands, including the grumpy little dwarfs. And as we've seen from the preview, and I've done a previous video on this, we are getting Universal Rivals decks alongside the next 2 warbands to arrive, including one in December. Finally, Dave touches upon the Daring Delvers and the Tooth and Claw decks, which you get in the Gnarlwood box, and touches upon the interesting new mechanic of plot cards, a special kind of card that sits outside of your deck and adds a rule to the game. Daring Delvers in particular rewards you for increasing your exploration count by advancing into enemy territory and occupying feature tokens as you go. In comparison, Tooth and Claw is an aggressive deck that encourages you to abandon any pretense of civilized conduct and instead launch your fighters at their enemies. Now, that's very much been my style of playing Underworlds, but I rarely win the game. They end by saying at the time of writing the studio themselves are immensely excited for Nemesis format. And I personally think it's great to see players go toe-to-toe regardless of how much Underworld stuff you've collected up until this point. You can just grab a warband you like, grab a Rivals deck, and you could compete at a Nemesis tournament. And you could go toe-to-toe with somebody that's been in the game since the Shadespire days. So that's it for me in this video. If I just scrunch back to the start, there is loads of other content in here if you did want to pick it up, and there's some cool modelling nods to the amazing looking Dark Tide computer game, some cool Flashpoint stuff involving ogres, and you know, plenty more. Right, so what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and if you've got any questions, just give me a nudge. Cheers.